How's everyone doing? If you could please drop a 1 in the chat, just to let me know if you could hear me, see the screen. That would be really helpful on our end. All right, cool. Thank you, Wolf. Awesome, thanks, Frank. Thanks, Stuart. So before we start, I'd like everyone to drop into the chat just so we could tailor this presentation to your business. I'd like to know, one, what type of business are you in? The size of your business, how many employees, and if you have cyber insurance. So you can, drop that into the chat. That way our presenter will have some really good information about who's in our audience and could probably speak directly to your business / situation. And that could be, really helpful. So as everyone's putting that into the chat, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to another NJ Thrives Thursday. We host this every Thursday at 12 p.m. And in November, we actually start NJ Thrives Tuesdays, which is exciting. And that's all about personal development for business. So that's going to be really cool. We're going to send out some stuff via email. So just make sure you're watching your email for that. I'm your host, by the way, Christian Pichardo, marketing consultant and CEO at nilumomedia.com. We're the New Jersey Small Business Development Center, and basically it's a statewide program powered by the SBA and partners. We help small businesses in New Jersey with no-cost small business consulting, training and events starting at $0, and exclusive small business resources. So today's agenda, again, is headline. We're going to go over 2 news articles. They've been ones that I've been repeating for the past 2-3 weeks, but they're very important. So that's that. Then we have our webinar and of course Q&A at the end of the webinar. So as for the headlines, like I said, there's not much new that has come out this week. These are just going to be reminders that you do have the NJEDA Small Business Lease Grant Program. It's open, and it's been open since last week on the 20th. They are still accepting applications. So, take a look at this if your business is eligible. The second thing here is going to be SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So again, this is not new, but this is a reminder for everyone that you can get disaster assistance from the SBA. And for either the grant or the loan, remember, the NJSBDC has a dedicated capital team. We call them our capital team, and they help businesses like you will guide you through the loan or grant process. So, what documents you need. Are the documents good? If you need a business plan, how's that put together? And it doesn't stop there. It's really for any business loan or grant that you might need assistance with. So, yeah, you can reach out to us, by the way, for the capital team at njsbdc.com/capital team. If you do not know where that is or what that looks like, I just want to pull it up really quick because it's super relevant to these news articles. So there you have it. So when you are ready, just click on Request a Capital Team here. You're going to be taken to a registration page, and you can go ahead and get started. So that said, those are headlines for today. 3 things to keep in mind for the webinar. Type your questions into the Q&A box so that they don't get lost between the conversations in the regular chat. Number 2 is complete the 3-minute survey after this webinar so that you can get access to the webinar recording and materials. It literally only takes 3 minutes, I promise. And number 3 is by attending this event, you're eligible for the Upgrade Your Business Certificate. For more information on that, you have the link down there below. And now, without further ado, I want to welcome Michelle Schaap, and this is part 4 of our Protect Your Tech series for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And today, you're going to show us what to do when your business is actually in the middle of a cyber attack. Is that right?
That is correct. And if I may, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. And please tell me if you see that.
Yes.
Excellent. So today, in the last of our series of 4, we are talking about when it happens, my implied pun intended. And hopefully none of you will ever have to deal with this. But hopefully today's session will help you to at least stay calm in the moment if you do. Now, normally when I've done these lunch and learn with you folks, I'd like to think that you take the time to fill out the surveys, you can get the slides and the recording because I'm just so scintillating. But today I'm actually going to encourage you to do so because there's actually resources within the slides that you can then refer to if God forbid you need them, which is not to say there weren't resources in the other slides, but particularly for this, if you print this out, you will then have it in your office, in your home, whatever, if God forbid you need it. So for those of you who've been with us for the last few sessions, you know that, of course, I can't do this without my legal disclaimer. So here's my legal disclaimer. So the first thing you want to keep in mind when we're talking about something has happened, do not call it a breach yet. The reason why you don't want to call it a breach yet is because that will start the clock ticking as to when you have to give notice, whether it's notice to law enforcement, whether it's notice to impacted employees, impacted customers, and so on. Now, that's not to say that you may not have contracts that say that you have to notify your customers if something happened that may have impacted your customers' information. But you should know that before this, God forbid, happens, what your obligations are that you may have signed up for with individual clients of yours. Otherwise, when we're dealing with a compromise of either PII, personally identifiable information, or protected health information, PHI, that is dictated by applicable laws. And different jurisdictions, and if you'll recall from prior sessions, 50 different states have 50 different breach notification laws. Some states say that you have to notify within 10 days. Some states say within 30 days. Some states say 60 days. You need to know what jurisdictions you might have to be dealing with and what those timeframes are so that if, God forbid, you do have a breach and not merely an incident, that you now have the clock ticking once you've confirmed the PII or PHI has in fact been compromised. And as I said, hopefully you have this information in your incident response plan already, meaning that you know you have employees and customers in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, whatever jurisdiction you may be in, so that you know what those states require before you're having to actually answer that question. Of course, you have to ask yourself, did I have a breach? So in most jurisdictions, if you have data that was encrypted and the decryption key was not compromised, you do not have a reportable breach. Sounds good. Unless, of course, the compromise happened, for example, through an insider or somebody who had inside credentials, in which case encryption is irrelevant because they're already into your systems. So it depends on how the attack has occurred, whether or not you can say, oh, phew, my data was encrypted, I don't have to worry. Keep in mind also the different jurisdictions have different criteria for what is a breach. So for example, in New York State, the mere access to information is a breach, even if that information was not exfiltrated or altered or deleted. Now, sometimes things happen in error. So let's suppose that Christian and I work together, and Christian's in sales and I'm in HR. And there's another employee in HR whose name happens to be Chris. And I'm sending an email to Chris, except that my email auto-populates to Christian. And I send W-2 files to Christian. And as soon as I hit send, I'm like, oh, I pick up the phone, I call Christian. I said, Christian, I meant to send it to Chris. I didn't mean to send it to you. Please delete this. I follow up with IT. I make sure that it's deleted. Christian says, no problem. I get it, Michelle, it happens. What you want to do in that instance, that's not a reportable breach. That's an, oh, phew, it was just Christian. But you want to document that. Even that simple incident, you want to document and say, on such and such date at such and such time, Michelle Schaap meant to send an email to Chris in HR, but instead sent it to Christian. Christian confirmed he deleted the email. IT confirmed the email was deleted. No harm, no foul. I've got that documented. And I keep that document in my records for 5 years. So if anybody asks, anything happen here? You've got documentation to say no.
So quick question,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yes.
How would you, or how can people document it? Just a simple Excel file, date, incident, comments, sort of something like that?
Well, again, the reason I asked the size of the businesses that are attending today's session, many of them are single business people or a handful of employees. And I think the largest business that we saw in the chat was 10. So depending upon how you keep your business records, and hopefully, again, you now have a incident response plan, having attended last week's session, that what you want to have next to your incident response plan is a binder where you keep records of cyber or non-cyber, for that matter, events. Don't call it breach. You could call it an incident, call it an event, what have you. But you want to keep a record of that. So you know that on this and such date, this and such happened. This is how we confirmed it was not a problem. You want to keep that documentation. Similarly, even if Christian didn't work in the company, let's suppose that Christian worked for my outside, don't have internal HR, and I have an outside HR resource. Again, Chris versus Christian. I sent it to Christian by accident. I have that same moment. I immediately contact Christian. I say, Christian, I meant to send this to somebody else. Again, if you are comfortable with a straight face and confidence that Christian is a good human being, and we know Christian is, and he's in fact deleted it, even though he's an external person now, not within your environment. If he can confirm, yes, I've deleted it, it's not in my delete folder anymore, anything else, I don't have backups, I don't have archives, it's gone. Again, document it, no harm, no foul. It's when you have a breach and you realize, oh my God, this has happened. And again, remember that breaches come in different sizes and shapes. So in our prior discussions, I shared with you where we had an insider who had stolen files. Not only did they steal files, but they put them onto a personal Dropbox. Now it's been exfiltrated and deleted those files from the company's Dropbox account. Now, as it happens, and you say, well, there's a breach, but we realized what had happened. We got back the company computer that had stolen files. We got the personal hard drive. We got access to the personal Dropbox. So follow me here. All of the breadcrumbs where these records were stolen, a breach, but we accounted for the records. Now, here's the interesting question. Is that a reportable breach or not? Now, I will share with you, I actually spoke to the State Police Cybercrime Unit on a no-names basis on behalf of my client, and we had this conversation. Reportable, not reportable, what do we think? We think we've accounted for all of the breadcrumbs. We brought in a forensic team to confirm we accounted for all the breadcrumbs. I am risk adverse and I am very conservative. And my contact, the state police, and I both concluded that if my client were as risk averse as I am, they in fact would have reported with the state police. And you say, well, why? You just told me, Michelle, I've accounted for all the breadcrumbs and they didn't go anywhere. Why are you reporting? The reason why you might still want to report is that in that particular compromise, 4 different individuals' social security numbers were exposed. Again, we think we covered the breadcrumbs, but nevertheless, we know those 4 individuals' social security numbers had left the works environment. If God forbid, a year, 2 years, 3 years later, those individuals realize their identity has been stolen. And when that identity theft is fully investigated, it traces back to my client's compromise. And my client didn't report that to the state police. Well, now she's violated the breach notification law, which required you to notify the state police within a certain time frame. Now, I will tell you that my client made a business decision not to do a report and not to notify the 4 impacted individuals because we had documented that we believe we had tracked all the breadcrumbs. That is not an unreasonable business decision. It was based on information available. She kept the records, but I will tell you again, I am risk adverse. I am prudent. I would have given that notice if it were me. There's unfortunately not a right or a wrong here in this case. It's an educated business decision, and it's a question of what your risk appetite is. But if, in fact, we couldn't have accounted for all of those breadcrumbs, and in fact, the data was now out in the wild, there would not have been an option. And when I say not an option, there's always a choice. Look at Yahoo. Look at Uber. They didn't tell us until how many years later? And the only reason that we found out about the Yahoo breach, and you've heard me say this before, is because Yahoo was selling itself to Verizon, and Verizon was going to out them if they didn't out themselves. So they did finally fess up and let us all know that, yes, billions of people's, I think it was over 1 billion people, information was compromised. They didn't tell us in a timely manner, and so they were dealing with fines. You as a small business owner, can you really weather the storm and the financial hit if you don't report in a timely manner? When something happens, whether it's a breach, whether it's an incident, again, I still want to jump back to the law for a minute. And I mentioned the different states' breach notification laws. And by the way, even if your data is encrypted, if the encryption key or decryption key rather was also accessed, it is a reportable breach because now somebody's got the tools to decrypt the data you so carefully encrypted. But the other thing is that, for example, under HIPAA, if you had an event which may or may not have compromised information, you may still have a reporting obligation to the Office of
Seems we lost
the healthcare consult. I'm sorry, what, Christian?
Okay. It seemed a little bit choppy for the last sentence, I think, but you're good now.
Okay. So did you hear me talking about OCR, Christian?
No. Can you repeat that?
Absolutely. So if you're a healthcare provider or a business associate, or, and I know we have a healthcare consultant involved in our discussion today, you may have a reporting obligation, even if it's not a breach. So you need to make sure if you're subject to sectoral laws, whether it's HIPAA, whether it's the New York State financial regs, or otherwise, that you have obligations to report, even if it's not a breach. So you need to be aware of the laws that you're subject to going into this, which goes back to understanding what businesses you're in, what businesses your clients are in, what you may have signed up for before the incident or breach occurs. Now, in terms of who you call first, again, if you're an operation of one, Michelle, yes, Michelle, we have a problem. If you have more than one person and you have involved people in your incident response team, you want to rally the troops. Now, again, we talked last week about having means to communicate. If you have your phone system over the internet and you've now been hit by ransomware, you may not be able to use your office phone lines to call each other. So hopefully part of your incident response plan is that you have alternate numbers, cell phones, to reach out to the incident response team and talk to each other and say, okay, what has happened that we had an event? Is this an incident or is it a breach? And how do we figure this out? Now, the reason why it's so important to know whether or not you have cyber insurance is because if you have cyber insurance, your carrier may dictate who your outside team members are. In other words, your cyber insurance carrier may have a panel of approved attorneys, a panel of approved forensic experts, a panel of approved crisis managers. Consider that the PR folks who are going to help you to spin the message in the most positive light possible. So if you have cyber insurance, you want to take a look at your policy, see what the reporting requirements are under the policy. Do you have to notify your carrier immediately, only after you've confirmed it's a breach. You want to know in advance before you have to look at it, but at least know where you can find that policy. You've taken the trouble to get it. In either case, I encourage you to call your attorney. And as you may have heard from prior discussions, the reason why you want to involve counsel, and I'm sorry, we are necessary evils in these instances, is that to the extent possible, you want to have all of the investigation, all of the reports coming under the attorney-client privilege to the extent possible. And again, case law out there is mixed as to whether or not an investigative report is going to be protected by attorney-client privilege. Obviously, the argument being that this is in anticipation of litigation because of the breach. I will tell you, some courts have taken the position that you would have done the investigation regardless, and therefore the report from your forensic team shouldn't be protected by attorney-client privilege. But if you don't retain them in the first instance through counsel, you don't have that ability to even make that argument. Now, does that mean that you always have to bring in your insurance folk? Does that mean that you always have to bring in outside counsel? No, it depends on what happened. And that's really what you need to understand always is, what am I dealing with? Am I dealing with the, oh, Christian, I shouldn't have sent that to you, or Christian, the bad actor who has now hit me with ransomware? If a device was lost, think about this. Can you wipe the device remotely? So I have my cell phone. I can access my work email on my cell phone. I have an environment here that's uniquely for my office and it's encrypted. And if I contact my IT department and I say, I lost my phone, I have no idea where it is, they can remotely wipe any data on here. And assuming that I've been properly trained as an employee of my firm to report that immediately, we can document. As near as we can tell, Michelle reported this within 1 hour of losing her phone. There's no indication that the data on her phone was compromised. We wiped the data remotely. We are good to go. No reportable breach. We want to document what happened. Now, some of you are small business owners. You may not have that ability. You may not have that luxury, which goes back to, it's so important to make sure that your phone is properly secured. Make sure that you have a robust password. If you're using biometrics, don't allow somebody steals your phone to then wave it in front of your face and open your phone. If I've got Christian's phone, I've just stolen it from him and I do this, I've just unlocked his phone. Yeah. So think about where the data is if something has been compromised. Now, some of you may have heard of a denial of service attack. And what a denial of service attack basically means that somebody has pulled together an army of computers to attack your email system and flood it with emails such that basically your computer crawls to a halt because it can't handle the traffic. The problem is that it may not be just a denial of service attack. It may be a denial of service attack with emails hidden in that collection of emails that are just waiting for you to click on one of them to launch an executable file. So don't just click on those emails to clean out your folder. Now, if you receive a ransom demand, guess what? You've got a problem. But you may have a choice. So if you receive a ransom demand, what you want to do is contact the New Jersey State Cyber Unit or the FBI and find out, do they have the decryption key? And as you've heard me mention in the past here, at least 50% of the known flavors of ransomware that are out there, there is a decryption key available. Now, you say, well, okay, does that get me home free? And I'm going to sound like a lawyer and say, it depends. If your data was encrypted in the first instance, and now it was essentially doubly encrypted by the bad actor with their ransom attack, but all the bad actor got was garbage because they got your encrypted data without the decryption key, and you can get the decryption key for free, good to go. You're not paying ransom. They can't out you on the dark web. Obviously, you have now reported it to the state police or the FBI because that's who you got the decryption key from. But you may not have that luxury. You may have already seen what we call proof of life. And when I get that ransom demand, they show me, oh, and by the way, Michelle, you see this? This is Christian's social security number. I got it from your files. Thank you so much. Now, not only do I have a reportable breach, but now I have to think about, okay, am I going to pay the ransom as well as getting the decryption key? Because otherwise, Not only is the bad actor compromised my system, which already triggered the reporting obligations, but they're going to put it out on the dark web if I don't pay them, and it's going to be further compromised. Oh, and by the way, there's no honor amongst thieves. So just because they tell you that they're not going to post it on the dark web if you pay them the ransom, you can't count on that. So you still do have to tell Christian his information has been compromised. Now, one of my clients called me several years ago where they had one employee click on what seemed like a legitimate email from somebody else who was in the same industry as they were. And as soon as they clicked on it, the employee realized, oh, crap, what did I click on? The way that the company's environment was set up, they could isolate this one employee's device from the rest of the environment before what had happened on that one device spread to the rest of the environment. If you can do that, and if you can follow the breadcrumbs, and you're not always that lucky, then you will know what happened and do I have reporting obligation, and if so, it's all going to depend on how your systems were set up in the first instance, whether you can do that or not. And if you have backups, you can't just load them up onto your existing environment because your existing environment probably has been compromised. So if you have backups, first of all, you don't know necessarily how long ago you were compromised, so that your backups may be corrupted too. That's problem number one. And your servers, at least your live servers, are compromised. So you may need to get all new equipment before you load up those backups. And of course, the problem for many small business owners is that they are an army of one. And you're supposed to be responding to this incident or breach and running your business and dealing with life in general. So there's a lot going on all at once when an event happens. And if the way that you found out the event happened, that you got called by a customer or by a reporter for the Star Ledger, you've got a lot more going on. Mm-hmm. Which brings us back to last week's discussion about having that incident response plan. Because when it happens, you don't want to be in panic mode. You don't want to be saying, oh my God, what did she say to that SBDC webinar? Oh, I don't remember. Which is why you want to have this ready. For those of you who work out and you go to reps or you play golf, what have you, and your coaches will tell you it's muscle memory. It's the same thing with a cyber event. You want to have done exercises to be prepared. You want to test your incident response plan to make sure that when you're in the heat of this compromise, you know who you're calling. You know who your external resources are to determine, can I isolate Michelle's device? And Christian and everybody else's devices are fine. And if I have my backups in a cloud, are they good to go if I get myself a new laptop? But in all cases, you need to know what happened, whether you have reporting obligations, what triggers the reporting obligations, and what your time frames are. Now, in terms of where you go, and this is where we start getting into the resources in these slides that I want you to guys have available to you if God forbid you need it. In New Jersey, you're reporting to the Cybercrimes Unit. And I will tell you that the folks at the Cybercrimes Unit, they are not there to out you. They are there to help you. Use the phone number, use the resources. They are not the enemy. They are useful, they are helpful. Now, I will tell you that for all of my clients, we have brought in our own external resources to diagnose what happened. We did not use the state's cyber units to figure out what happened. You may or may not have the luxury of affording a third-party forensic team, but if you can, I would encourage you to, because obviously the more you can keep to yourself, the better. And in fact, what we did when we were dealing with my clients' different data breaches is that we did the forensics. And then once we had the information that we wanted the state to then follow up on with a potential criminal action against the bad actor, is that we shared with them all of the analysis that we had. We shared with them the IP addresses and what have you, so that somebody could look at what was going on and decide whether or not they could in fact go after the bad actor that had compromised my client's systems. But ideally, you're doing the forensics yourselves. And then if you are reporting to the state because you have a reportable breach, you're giving them in a nice, neat package as opposed to having them literally getting into your shorts and into your computers. Preferably, you're not having to do that. In terms of what you're then telling customers, in New Jersey, there's not a form per se. And so what you need to do is explain politely as you can, and that's where it comes into dealing with a crisis communication counselor, is how to politely tell your customers, guys, I'm really sorry this happened. This is what happened. This is the steps that I'm doing, and so on and so forth. This is not magic. I'm telling you, don't copy this verbatim, but it gives you an idea of what a letter might look like to your customers, what it might look like to your clients. And I will tell you, what goes with these letters is another page or two that gives resources to the people that have been compromised. So for example, it may give them information on how to report to the IRS, how to report to the FTC, how to do a credit watch or a credit freeze, because you want to be as proactively helpful to the people who you caused this compromise to. And in some cases, what you may have received, so let's suppose you are subject to the Equifax breach, as most of us were. Equifax was then offering you credit monitoring services. Well, I assure you they weren't offering it to you out of the goodness of their heart. Different states' laws require credit monitoring services. It may be for 1 year, it may be for 2 years, it depends on the jurisdiction. Christian, it looks like we have a question.
Sure, let's check it out. I don't think it's relevant to this slide. I think we could wait for the Q&A. It's with spyware app and a question about a spyware app.
Okie doke, then I will keep on going. Now in New York, there is a specific form that you have to use to report. And depending upon the size of the breach and the information that was compromised, you have to send that form to 3 or 4 different reporting agencies. Now, most of my clients don't report directly. They have me as their counsel report. So what you see here on the screen is the information that I was giving as the person who was reporting the compromise. Again, different jurisdictions, and depending on the size of the breach, you may or may not have to notify the state. So for example, in Delaware, in this particular compromise, one person's information was impacted. And the state of Delaware takes the position of if it was less than X number of human beings, you don't have to tell the state. You only have to tell the impacted individual, which goes back to you need to know, preferably in advance, what jurisdictions you're dealing with. Because the more quickly you can respond, the more comfort you have knowing that you've given information in a timely manner. Because remember, for small business owners, you need to get back to the business of doing your business. And all of this is happening literally at once. So please, 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 if you haven't already seen last week's conversation, go back to it. Understand what your incident response plan should look like and what it should contain. You can print out what the forms look like for the state of New York. You can print out what the forms look like for the state of California. And by the way, California actually dictates what the letter should look like to go to impacted individuals. Now, in terms of how you give notice to individuals, it has to be, in most cases, by snail mail. Think about the cost now. Let's suppose that you have 500 people that you have to send a piece of paper to by mail. Now multiply that by 10. Multiply that by 100. That's a lot of money you're spending just on postage to give notice. Now, of course, if you have a breach that's that large, you could have the privilege, quote unquote, of putting notice in the local newspaper, which needless to say, you really don't want to have to do. In some cases, depending upon your relationship with your customers, your website and privacy policy may state that I will communicate with you through email if I have a compromise, unless, of course, it's the email itself which was compromised, in which case that's not going to work. And some companies that have been breached, if you go to their websites, you will see a notice that says, we have had a security incident. For more information, click here. And I will tell you again, when we think about the cost of these breaches and why it's so important for you to be prepared in the first instance to minimize the impact, is that you're not only giving notice to these people, but as I mentioned, you may have to be giving them credit monitoring services for 1 year or 2 years. And on top of all of this, there may be fines. There's a lot to consider when we're doing an incident response or a breach response. And you want to be prepared, because when you're in the midst of it, you are going to be in panic mode. No matter how prepared you are, your business is not running. Especially if you're a one-person show, the only thing you can think about in that moment is the breach. And you're calling it a breach, and you're not calling it an incident, because you're in that mode, which is why it's so important. And I think about, what is it, the Staples red button that says, don't panic. We want you to not panic. We want you to be prepared and to understand what you can and should be doing. Depending upon the size of the breach, you might actually have to provide a call center. Hopefully your businesses, well, I take that back. You may want your businesses to get that big that you would need a call center. But if you have a business that's big, then you at least have members of your team to handle that. But that's what we need to understand when we're dealing with a breach, that once you've confirmed it's a breach, there is so much to deal with. Now, I'm just sharing you some other jurisdictions to give you an idea. This is what you need to understand, that it's not just New Jersey, and it may not be just New York. Wherever you might have employees, and by the way, we've talked before about what you retain or what you don't retain. I think I've shared with you in prior discussions, one of my clients kept records for 25 years, unencrypted, and they were compromised. So we had 25 years of former employees' information available and stolen. So we had to go back through 25 years of records to say, okay, I've got all this information that was compromised. Do I even know where these people are at this point to give them timely notice, to figure out what states I need to notify? And of course, where are your customers? Because your customers, where they reside, it's going to dictate what you have to give them and when you have to give them. So with one of my clients, we were dealing with New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. For another client, we were dealing with New York, Virginia, and Florida. And I shared with you, I believe last time we talked, that one of my clients was in one of those lovely square states, and they were dealing with at least 5 jurisdictions where they had to figure out the notice that they were giving. And again, there is not a federal breach notification law. So some jurisdictions will say, I need all of this information that you're seeing listed on the screen for Virginia. New York has a specific form you're filling out. California has a specific form you're filling out. New Jersey does not. So you need to know who you're dealing with, when you're dealing with, and by the way, the laws change. So New Jersey's law today might not dictate this, but next year it may say something else. Now, in terms of who you have to tell, so look at this form. This form is specific for a current, for former employees. We had a different form for customers. And again, these are things that we want to ideally have prepared in advance. So if you were to look at my client's incident response plan, not only does it indicate the team, not only does it have a playbook, depending upon the type of compromise, going back to whether it was a denial of service attack, a lost device, whether it was a business email company, fill in the blank. We have in our playbook what we do, how things are escalated, who has the reporting requirements. Because again, you don't want, let's suppose that Christian and I are in the business together. Christian's the CEO and I'm the vice president. The CEO's instinct is to be the face and the voice of the company in compromise. The downside to that is that you can't escalate. So you might want to have the vice president giving the message in the first instance, so that when the vice president screws up, then you can have the president of the company step in and look like the good guy. Ugh. Ignore Michelle. She didn't know what she was talking about. Listen to me, Christian, and said. You may choose instead with a crisis communication counselor. No. Given what happened here, you want to have Christian be the face of the message. Again, having that person as part of your response team will help you to figure out what's the best way to communicate this. How do I want to share this information with law enforcement? How do I want to share this information with my customers? Now, I will tell you that one of my partners got a letter from a law firm, and this was probably last month, saying, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, we are sorry to inform you that your information was compromised. We're offering you credit monitoring services, blah, blah, blah." My partner forwarded it to me and said, "Is this a scam?" Thinking that the notice itself was a scam. And I said, "Well, let me do some digging." So I went online and did some research. Did this law firm report a breach? Didn't see anything in that regard. So I went to the law firm's website, and it so happens that the law firm had a cybersecurity practice. So I looked up who's the partner in that practice, and I called the attorney. And I said, "Hi, this is Michelle Schapp. I'm with CSG here in New Jersey. One of my partners got a letter from your law firm, and we want to know, is this a legitimate letter? Did you guys, in fact, have a compromise? And if so, please call me back." Sure enough, I got a call back the next day. Indeed, the law firm had had a breach and was giving my partner notification. My partner said, "But who are these guys? They're in Virginia. I'm here in New Jersey. I never used a law firm in Virginia. Why did they even have my information?" And by the way, the letter was a form letter. So now my partner is pissed off that A, his data has been compromised, B, it's been compromised on a law firm that, as far as he knows, he has no relationship. And in fact, the letter said, "Oh, and by the way, the breach happened in July." And he was only getting the letter in October. He's like, "What the heck?" Well, it turns out what happened was that they had financed the purchase of a car. The loan had been sold, and in the sale transaction, and a law firm was involved, and the law firm's records were compromised. And now they had to notify all these people they had no relationship with. Well, I have to tell you, the law firm with a cyber practice didn't use a crisis communication counselor because their correspondence, pardon my French, sucked. And all it did was piss off my partner. And it probably pissed off anybody else who received that letter too. If you're having to notify your customers, your employees, your former employees that they've been compromised, you want to make sure that you're notifying them in a way that they're not going to come after you. Their first instinct is to sue you, as opposed to realizing you were a victim too, especially as a small business owner. It is so important to make sure the message is being conveyed in a way that your business is not going to lose every single customer it ever had. And if you remember last week, we talked about getting to know the reporters that cover your industry. So let's suppose that you were in the healthcare consulting business, and you happen to know that Christian works for the Star Ledger and he covers healthcare for the Star Ledger. You might want to get to know Christian before, God forbid, you have a compromise, so that if you have to put information out by newspaper, Christian's going to spin that message in a way that, Michelle, she's a good, hardworking person. As a small business owner, she used reasonable measures. Now we're going back 2 lectures, by the way, but stuff happens. As opposed to Christian saying, "Michelle's an irresponsible business owner. You never want to use her again. She had this breach. She didn't tell you about it for 6 months. She's god awful." You don't know what's going to happen if you're not prepared. And you need to be able to do this all while you are realizing you've been breached. You're trying to get the bad actor out of your system. If they're in your systems, you're still trying to run your business, and you're trying to figure out, who am I talking to and when, and recover. It's not, "Oh, I do step 1 and I do step 2 and I do step 3 and I do step 4. It's all at the same time. So if you guys aren't getting the message yet, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, but every step of that marathon, every phase is being run in tandem. So you want to have your ducks in a row before you're in this active conversation. Now, is that how it often happens with small business owners? No, it's not. That's just not the reality of a small business owner. And many of my breach clients are indeed small business owners, like you folks as our attendees. I will tell you, all of my clients who had compromises, they are still in business today. I'm happy to share, but it was a process. We had to bring in an outside forensic team. And by the way, the forensics aren't done overnight. Depending upon the size of the compromise and how long it was going, the logs have to be analyzed. It takes time. And depending upon how your systems were set up, you may not have logs that go back enough time to even do the forensics to understand how you were compromised. You might not be able to eradicate that actor from your systems. You may have to throw your systems out and start anew, which goes back to my example of my client whose systems were set up well in the first instance, where we could in fact segregate one device from the rest of the environment. In terms of what you can share, and I mentioned before that when you send out the breach notification to the impacted individuals, you want to give them resources. Now, this happens to be an example from New York State in terms of who you can provide information to, whether you're reporting to the New York Department of Taxation, whether you're reporting to the FTC, to credit monitoring resources. Again, this is just an example. Please do not use this as what it should look like. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what these things should be looking like when you're giving notice to impacted individuals. So if you have to share this information, you know in advance, preferably, because it's part of your incident response plan, you have these forms in your incident response so that then you can put it into Word document and get it out in a timely manner. You want to be prepared. You want to have these forms prepared, whether it's to be giving it to current employees, former employees, current customers, former customers. And by the way, it could be prospective employees, depending upon what you've got. Now, let's suppose I'm about to hire Christian. I'm in the onboarding process. He doesn't work for me yet, but I'm getting him set up in my system. I may have to give him notice. And you might have thought about bringing on a client and they gave you confidential business information. Now, if it's business information that was breached and not PII or PHI, that's not what these forms look like. The relationship with the customer may dictate how you're giving them information, which goes back to what did your contract with the customer say? You need to know these things in advance. It will make responding much easier. If you've had wire fraud, and again, for those of you who've attended these prior lectures, you've heard me talk about the FBI kill chain. You want to report in a timely manner. Ideally, within 24 to 48 hours, maximum 72 hours. If you don't report in that time frame, you're not going to recover the funds. But in addition to reporting the FBI, you want to report to the bank. Now, this happens to be off of Chase's website. So this is not a form that you should be using unless, of course, you're banking with Chase. But ideally, and I shared this with you last week, what you want to do before you're in the moment is talk to your banker. Ask your banker, if God forbid, my accounts get compromised, whether it's your business credit card, whether it's your business account, who do I contact at the bank? How do I contact them? And by the way, if I realize this on Memorial Day or on a Saturday, how do I get in touch with you? And you want to have that in advance so that you're not scrambling to look on the internet to figure that out. Have it printed out, have it at your fingertips, get backup numbers so that you know what to do. Not in the heat of the moment, but before it's happened. And in terms of reporting to the federal government, as you've heard me talk about before, you're reporting to IC3. Now, this happens to be the link if it's a ransomware demand, but if you go to ic3.gov, you'll see links to other types of events as well. This is what you want to understand, is that you're having to deal with all of these things after something has happened. Ideally, you want to be prepared, and you want to be able to then respond in a rational manner and not like a chicken with its head cut off. So what I'm sharing with you is the resources to prepare again in advance. And this goes back to prior conversations, looking at the NIST framework, looking at ISO certifications, and if you need it, the Cybercrime Support Network. And what's great about the Cybercrime Support Network, just like SBDC, it's a free resource. So if you have a breach and you're not sure what to do, first of all, you can contact the New Jersey State Cyber Unit. Again, remember, they are not the enemy. They're there to help you. They're not there to out you. They have resources and they can talk you through what to do. They are good people. Trust them. If you can meet the local FBI agents in your area before something happens, do that. And I understand, in fact, the citizens academies have started up again. So
Seems to cut off a
Other
little bit,
field office-
Michelle. Just the last maybe 30 seconds or so. Maybe even less, actually.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so did you hear me talking about getting to know your FBI agents and Citizens Academy?
No, I think that was the part that we missed.
Okay, so you guys may have heard me talk about in our prior discussions that the FBI and Homeland Security host Citizens Academies. My understanding is that they have started up again. So ideally, you could join one of those Citizens Academies in their next coming session. And if you go online and just search for Homeland Security or FBI Citizens Academy, you'll see when the next one is starting up in your area, and you can apply to join that so you can get to know the people in your area before you're dealing with a crisis. Reach out to the NJ Kick before you have to and get to know an officer down there, preferably through counsel. You're doing the reporting, but it's nice to have a friendly voice on the other end of the phone when you're dealing with an incident or breach. Now, the last thing I want to remind you all of is that we're not just talking about cybercrime, because it could be paper files that have been exposed. So if somebody walks out with a box of files, you still have a reporting obligation if that box of files included social security numbers or account information or anything else like that. A reportable breach isn't just a cyber event. And again, depending on what your agreements are with your customers, a reportable breach may be because you've let loose a marketing campaign for a new product. So understand what you have to report that constitutes that reportable breach and to whom. Christian, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to catch my breath and let's talk about what we've got lurking in the chat and in Q&A.
Yeah, let's get to it. So in the Q&A, we have Minnie asks, is it helpful to use a subscription VPN service that hides your IP address along with a spyware app?
I will tell you candidly, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. I am happy to say that I know how to turn on my computer and how to call my help desk. And that question is actually for somebody who has more technical knowledge than I do. And I'd be happy to share with you various resources as to whether that is a good option for a reasonable measure. Obviously, the less that you are sharing about your business, whether you're hiding your IP address, whether you're monitoring your systems, whether you've got good firewalls, antivirus software, what have you. But the question is more going back to preventative measures and reasonable measures as opposed to responding to a breach. So yes, to the extent that you can prevent somebody from figuring out where your environment is located and being able to spoof your environment, that's a good thing. Whether that particular solution is a good solution or not, I don't want to give you misinformation. And I would encourage you to reach out to either an internal or an external IT resource to find out if that particular solution would be the right one for you to protect you one way or the other. In the chat, do we have questions, comments, thoughts?
So we have one. Let's see. So Frank Bell says, I found some software on my computer that violates memory integrity. The company that sells the software finds that my business is not in their customer database. It is not easy to get into their database. They sell computer security software, which I don't know who purchased it. Is this a CISA or Microsoft Security Question, or is there some other suggestion?
So I would be concerned if I've got software on my system or a resource that's selling me something that I don't know what they are or why it's there. So in the first instance, again, going back to reasonable measures, what I always put into the policies that I put together for my clients is that Joe Schmo employee can't just upload software or purchase software and put it onto a work environment. That's number one. It has to go through an IT resource before it's loaded onto the system. Now, whether a particular resource that's marketing to you is reputable or not. So my clients often ask me, well, who is a good forensic solution? Who is a good monitoring service? And I reach out to my contacts in the technology community and I put that question to them. Now, I will tell you that reaching out to CISO or to the KIC, they're not going to endorse one particular service provider. Certainly, you could check with the Better Business Bureau whether somebody has a good reputation or a bad reputation. And again, we talked about this in an earlier discussion, that you want to vet whatever vendor you're thinking about engaging with. So if you're thinking about using a particular resource to monitor your systems or not, or to help you respond, you want to kick their tires. Do they themselves have cyber insurance? So if God forbid they don't fulfill the contract, you've got a resource to go after them if they create more of a breach. And do they have E&O coverage, again, if they don't fulfill the services properly? And you want to hear from their customers. Have they provided good references? Do that investigation in advance before you engage with a potential resource. Do we have other questions or thoughts here in the chat, Chris? I'm sorry, Christian.
I don't see anything else. Guys, please leave any questions you might have into the Q&A box down below. We just got a question that came in by Shelly. I contacted a cybersecurity company and they were going to run my data to see if I was on the dark web. I called and they said their tech was working on it, and then I have not heard anything back from them yet. I've not paid or anything yet, but I did have to close my bank accounts and report the scam to local police, but they cannot help at all. What do you recommend at this point?
First of all, I apologize. I do have to go back to the beginning of the session. Remember that I am not acting as your counsel. So I can only give you so much information as a consultant through the SBDC. I would absolutely reach out to NJKIC because you're right. The local police, and even though you should report it to the local police as part of a breach reporting obligation, you know, let's suppose that your business is located in West Orange. You do want to go to the West Orange Police Department, but I would absolutely reach out to the New Jersey Cyber Unit, NJKIC, the resource is right here on the slide, and report that. Now, what concerns me and the implication of your question is that these folks themselves may be bad actors, not just that they stole your money, but they may have done something else in your environment. And so if I were, oh, no, understood. And I appreciate you pointing that out. So they did not steal your money, but did they steal data or did they do something else? And so I would want to bring in a reputable forensic team to look at my environment to see if I gave these folks access credentials to my system, what did they do with it? And I don't know whether you gave them access credentials or not, but I would be wary, and I would want somebody to come in that I know and trust and examine what's going on in my environment to see if these people did something. And absolutely report it to NJKIC. You could also report it to the Better Business Bureau. And I am sorry that happened to you. Chris, do we have other thoughts?
Any other questions, guys? Please leave them into the Q&A, or at this point, you could really put it into the chat as we're monitoring that now. But just to sort of recap the presentation. So steps for while you're in a cyber attack, you contact the CISA first, was it?
No. When you have it, and I just do want to recap that, and I appreciate you bringing us back to the beginning, Christian. So you may or may not have had a breach. First, you want to figure out, did I have a breach? And even if I didn't have a breach, depending upon what sectoral laws I'm subject to, and depending on what my contracts say, I may still have to report, even if it was merely an incident and not a breach. If you've determined that it was a breach of personally identifiable information or protected health information, then the clock starts ticking on state notification laws and sectoral notification laws. You want to make sure that you've given timely notice to the appropriate authority. If it's New Jersey, reporting it to the cyber unit. the state police. If it's New York, you've got 3 or 4 different folks that you're reporting to. If it's in Delaware, remember what I said, depending on the number of people that are impacted, you may report only to the impacted individual or to the Attorney General. Every state is different as to whom you have to report and when. Once you've determined you've actually had that breach, you then also, in tandem with giving timely notice, you're trying to eradicate the breach, make sure the bad actors are out of your system, make sure that you're able to recover operations with clean data, and trying to get back to business, and also analyze it as part of the recovery. What do I do to prevent this from happening again? So if it was a wire fraud, now do I have to train my people to say, pick up the phone when you get an email from Christian that says, I've changed my banking? Or if you had a lost device that you couldn't wait remotely, the lesson learned is, guess what? Now all employees' devices that connect to the system have to have device management software loaded onto their devices so that you can wipe it remotely. Yeah. Understand what happened so you can prevent it from happening again. And again, whether it was an incident or an actual breach, you've got to document that. And if you're doing an investigation, that documentation should be going onward. Who did it? What time, where, when, and so forth. And keeping those records, because the regulators are going to want to know what happened.
Perfect. Perfect recap. So I have one more question here. I believe we sort of answered this from Dennis. It says, does a VPN prevent hackers from entering your computer? Is the other end of a VPN encrypted?
And I'm going to sound like a lawyer. It depends. It depends on how the VPN was set up. So yeah. I've shared with you in a prior conversation that one of my customers had an employee who was working remotely. He allowed his son to game on the same computer that he was remoting into the work environment. There was a VPN. It was not a well-secured VPN, and the environment was not encrypted. So it all depends on how that VPN and the overall environment was set up in the first instance as to whether that's going to protect bad actors from getting into your system. But you also have to remember that not all bad actors are outsiders. It could be a disgruntled employee who's attacking from within, in which case the VPN is not going to prevent that compromise.
Right. Right. Awesome. I think, let's see. I think that's pretty much it. If anyone has any last questions, we'll take one more on.
I did see something in the chat, Christian, that someone was asking about the Citizens Academies, and it's actually a link in one of the prior sessions slide deck. I don't have it in this slide deck, I apologize. But if you go and Google FBI Citizens Academy or Homeland Security Citizens Academy, you will come up with that information. And I can certainly forward it to Christian and his team, and they can share it with you after the program's completed.
Yeah, and for anyone looking for the previous webinars, we put a link into the chat. Just scroll up a little bit there, and it should say njsmallbusinesshelp.com/NJ Thrives Thursdays. Both have an S at the end. And that's where we have all the on-demand webinars available for you to watch. And we do have all the previous cybersecurity webinars on there. So you could always check that out. All right, cool. Minnie says, perfect, thank you. And let me go ahead and share the final things on my screen. But thank you so much, Michelle, for that wonderful session. For everyone, next week we have Tim Peter with small business e-commerce mistakes and how to avoid them. So that's next week. You know, we're getting into Black Friday, shop small, Christmas, right? So these are all holidays. You really want to hone into your e-commerce skills. So this is a perfect webinar, in my opinion, for next week. Hope to see you next week on this one. And remember, NJSBDC is here to help your business. No cost small business consulting, training and events like this at $0. You paid nothing to be here. And exclusive small business resources. So to get started, go ahead and register at njsbdc.com/request-counseling. So that said, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, again, for the wonderful, 4 events we had this month. I think we really learned a lot about cybersecurity this month, and hopefully a bunch of small businesses are now ready and prepared for any cybersecurity threats. So that's it for today. I'll see everyone next week, and happy Halloween.
Stay well,
Bye.